Hi, everyone. Just a few minutes away from getting started on our Blaxit talk. You are welcome. My name is Muhammida Muhajir. I'm going to be sort of like the host, moderator, all that. And I am tuning in from Accra, Ghana. I am one of the Blaxiters, as we're going to call it. And we have really just a diverse group of people who are going to be joining us, just sharing their thoughts on just this whole idea of, African Americans, our place in the world. Do we stay in the US? There's, a lot of talk about that and what that can look like in the future. And then if Africa is in fact a place for us, there's some of us, myself included, who have taken that step to, move to the motherland, our ancestral homeland, and we'll be sharing, what that experience has been like. But I'm gonna just, we're going live now. We're on time. We're not doing CP time. We're not doing Ghana Man time. We're going we gonna keep it right there because I think we have a lot to discuss, and I know there are a lot of questions, a lot of comments, a lot of things that people want to share on this topic. So we're just gonna jump right in. I'm gonna introduce our panel one by one, just bring them in. So our first panelist is Erinn Ransom-Ofori. Erinn is a professor of Africana Studies, a diaspora repatriation advisor, a mindset transformation coach, and the founder of the consulting firm Infinite Potential Africa. Erinn has a BA in African and African American Studies from UCLA, a master's degree in Africana Studies from Cornell University, and was conducting her PhD in African Diaspora Studies when she relocated to Ghana, where she currently lives with her family since 2007. Welcome, Erinn.
Thank you, Muhammida. Thanks for having me.
Yes, thank you. So I know a lot of people want to know what it takes to Blaxit. So, you'll be filling us in on that. Okay. Next on our panel is Andre Smith. Welcome, Andre. Andre is based in Philadelphia, so he's broadcasting live from Philly. Andre is a professor of law, the executive director of the Economic Justice Law Review, a published author, and the founder of the Afro-Atlantican Legal Academy. Andre holds a BS in economics from the University of Maryland, College Park, a JD from the Howard University School of Law, HU, and LLM in taxation from the Georgetown University Law Center. So welcome, Andre.
Howdy. Glad to be here.
All right. Okay. And last and definitely not least, we have Marvin X, who is tuning in from
hey, live right now.
Yes, we're live right now. He's live.
Marvin X, how y'all doing? Glad to be here. I'm in Oaktown. For to get down.
All right. So Marvin X is our OG of the panel. He is an accomplished poet, playwright, and essayist of the Black Arts Movement, BAM, and was a co-founder of the Black House and the Black Arts West Theater in San Francisco. For the past 50 years, Marvin X has continued to work as an activist, lecturer, teacher, and producer while releasing numerous books of poetry and essays. He has received writing fellowships and grants from from Columbia University, National Endowment of the Arts, and the National Endowment of the Humanities. So this is our panel of experts. We are going to be discussing the Blaxit topic, concepts. Marvin X, are you with us?
Yes, I'm here.
Okay, all right, because I'm gonna start with you. Just thinking
about you want to do that.
Yeah, we starting with you. I'm in Africa where we give, reverence to the elders. So we're gonna start with you.
All right.
Yeah, you ready? I have a question. We're starting off.
Question for me?
Yes.
What's your question?
All right, but your arm is in the way. We can't see you. Okay. All right. So yes. Okay. So you were a member very early in your life, career of the Nation of Islam. And I think something that's very interesting about the nation, but also that Elijah Muhammad had this concept of what it could look like for African Americans living or to stay in the United States, and what that could look like. So can you give us a little idea, what was that plan? It's in every issue of Muhammad Speaks, what we want, and talk to us a little bit about what that vision was.
Well, basically, what you're talking about is separation.
Mm-hmm.
And actually, he said separation either here or somewhere else.
Mm-hmm.
But he said we need to separate from these people who are disagreeable to live with in peace, as we see. So, and he wasn't the first. There was a whole movement, as you know, in the 19th century of black people trying to separate and leave here, ultimately leave here. And some of them told us we will never be free here. Never. The brothers in the immigration movement of the 19th century. So Elijah Muhammad said, let's get out of here. At the same time, as he said, separation, he had on the masthead of the paper, the brothers from America reaching to Africa and uniting with the brothers and sisters in Africa. So the main point is, what choices do we have?
But what about the 5 states? He said something about we should have.
Well, yes, he talked about 5 states. The Republic of New Africa talked about states, and even before that, didn't the communists talk about the Black Belt South, where the majority of blacks were? So Elijah said, this is where the majority of our people are. So we deserve some states for the free labor that we've given to America in building America. We deserve this, reparations, you call it.
Mm-hmm.
And I also have to say that Elijah and other people talked about reparations from Africa.
Mm-hmm.
Yes, he sure did. So
okay.
It's it's like we have choices, as you know,
Mm-hmm.
to be here, to try to get sovereignty here, or to get out of here.
Mm-hmm.
Whether we go to Africa or to the moon,
Okay.
we might have to get out of here. As we see at this moment, we can't even leave here right now. Is that right? Even white people can't leave here.
Right. Yes.
So
okay.
Situation.
Okay. All right. Thank you. So, Andre, I want to move on to you and just kind of like that idea of sovereignty, reparations, how feasible are some of those things? How far away do you think we are from that? How can we be there and get what we deserve? Do you think it's possible? I want to get some thoughts on that.
Well, I'm going to say very far.
Mm-hmm.
I am very displeased with the current situation where reparations is being used as a political tool. It's basically being used as a get out the vote effort. It's, in my view, about a year and a half ago, it started with the right wing, and maybe I'll get in trouble for this, I don't know, from some viewers or whatever, but about a year and a half or 2 years ago, this ADOS movement seemed to start and separate American black folks from the rest of the world, and started making sort of I don't want to call it a new claim to reparations, but an adamant claim for reparations that would exclude everyone else. And I believe the Democratic Party or the left responded to ADOS by presenting reparations in the last year and a half as if it were serious. But I'm a tax professor, and for the last 20 years, we have lowered taxes, not raised taxes. We are attacking pension plans. We're not buffering pension plans. We're reducing welfare. We're not increasing welfare. So the idea that any major political party is going to get behind. I think Robert Johnson put it at something like 434 billion or whatever the case may be.
Some trillion.
Right, trillion. I'm sorry. Right. So the idea that white folks don't even want to pay for social services for other white folks, and so we've seen the Byron Allen case went against us. Shelby versus Holder, the Voting Rights Act has been dismantled. So you have so many opportunities and dynamics that cost white people much less than reparations, and they're unwilling to do that. So for me to jump past all of those things and expect the United States government or people or what have you to issue reparations in an amount that would close the racial wealth gap, I'm very pessimistic about that. These overtures that we're seeing from Nike and Netflix to include us, I don't actually want to discount those things entirely. However, I do think when it comes to the term reparations, that's probably what we're going to get. So amounts from certain private industries, amounts from maybe even some political jurisdictions that make us feel included within the American fabric for a while, until maybe another 20 years when we have an economic, I guess you can call it bottoming out, another riot or what have you, and then another round of white largesse or racial philanthropy. I hope I'm wrong. I hope I'm wrong. I'm hoping that after 6 months, I'm hoping after November election, all of this continues. But as much as I support the Black Lives Matter movement, all movements require financing and funding. And it seemed to have spiked in 2014, 2015, and then receded after the 2016 election. Then 6 months before this election, they are funded heavily again. And I just hope, against my better judgment, that after November, the funding for Black Lives Matter continues. The enthusiasm for inclusion continues. However, inclusion is not justice.
Okay. All right. Yeah.
I'd like to be more hopeful.
Okay. All right. All right. No, we wanted to,
But I think that also ties into, again, what we're talking about today is, are we satisfied? And when I say we, I don't mean to suggest that we're all going to operate as one monolith, but each individual, each person individually has to decide whether their demand for this country is inclusion or justice. If it's justice, then the return to Africa, the return or the expatriation to anywhere seems more palatable or likely, because it just doesn't seem as though justice is the end goal for the United States as a commonwealth capitalistic country, however you want to describe it. If inclusion is your goal, then maybe repatriation is not what you're looking for, because yes, America is going to do things here and there to make us feel included. I hear that we're going to have the Black national anthem played at NFL games instead of Colin Kaepernick playing. So the idea that they will try to help us feel included, that is consistent with how they expect us to continue being in the United States and work for cheap. I mean, they brought us here to work for cheap. So whatever they can do to have us continue working for cheap, that is their plan. So it is up to us to determine what it is we want out of life: inclusion or justice.
Okay. All right. So thank you for that. I mean, I just, people are talking a lot about reparations, and, one doesn't know, are we getting close to it or farther away? So from that comment, I would say, looks like we are quite far away. I want to go now to Erinn. Erinn, if you're just joining us, she is broadcasting from Accra, Ghana, where I am also. You know, and again, we're talking about this concept, you know, we heard from the first two that, you know, we're looking for justice. It doesn't seem like it's happening. And some of us feel like, you know, moving back to Africa is, you know, what is needed. You know, just for a sense of self, humanity, you know. Erinn, you know, you've been living in Ghana for what, like 13 years now?
13
Yeah.
years. Mm-hmm.
So just talk to me about, you know, what mindset you had before you moved. You know, I always think about like slave plantations, right? There were some slaves who had it in their mind that they were going to escape. They didn't know what it was going to look like. There was no internet to see what Canada or Missouri or any of these states look like. They just was like, I can't take it anymore. I'm leaving. It's like liberty or death. So I'm just kind of like wondering, in this modern time, do we have like that same mindset? What was your mindset before you said enough is enough and I'm moving to Africa? Ghana.
Yeah, actually, for me, I really like to feel empowered in any of my moves. So no one is going to run me out of any space. So for me, it was more about looking at broader options. I didn't come here intending to stay, but I feel like Africa calls you. And I actually came here, I was finishing my PhD. I basically didn't want to be a doctor of something that I only knew in books. So I came here for my own integrity and wanted to see if I would recognize my theoretical education on the ground. So for me, my move was sort of gradual. I was here for 3 months, and it just was that at the end of the 3 months, I had more questions than I had answers. And I felt very strongly that it wasn't time for me to leave. So everyone before I came said, oh, you're going to go there and you're going to, you know, find a husband and you're going to end up staying. That wasn't my intention at all. I was planning on basically expanding my CV and coming back and leveraging my experience here. But it turned out that I never felt it was right to leave. And I always said that I was going to stay as long as I felt like this is where I should be. And 13 years in, you know, so, but on the reparations topic, and I know we'll probably get into this, but my perspective on reparations is kind of like an addition to the things that we've heard. Reparations is about more than just economics. The economics is extremely important, I believe. But again, taking my own power, reparations, the root word is to repair, you know, and I believe that on a certain level, the hand that hurt you is not the hand that can heal you, you know. So there's a certain healing, the reparations, the emotional, the psychological, even the geographic reparations in terms of repairing and remembering the African family. That's the sort of reparations that I'm living here. And so every chance I get, I try to insert that into the conversation about reparations so that we don't focus exclusively on you know, the kind of reparations that Andre says, frankly, doesn't think that, you know, it's likely. So are we going to sit and wait to be repaired? Or are we going to take matters into our own hands and start to build something together? And so my living reparations in Africa is about building an Africa for the future with my African brothers and sisters. So just as another layer of reparations, not instead of, but in addition to, and it's something that is in our power. That kind of repair is in our power. And so that's my perspective on it.
Okay. I want to move a little bit because it's something that I find is very interesting, you know, just the whole idea of, you know, pan-Africanists, especially those who are in the U.S., who sometimes, you know, I mean, it's a known fact that even Marcus Garvey never sort of stepped foot on the African continent. But I think for some of us in the U.S. who, you know, talk a lot about Pan-Africanism, but have like yet to ever step foot on Africa. I want to just kind of, do you think people are still very afraid of Africa? You know, what in limits, forget about moving, just even traveling, visiting, you know, what do you think, you know, limits people? Andre, for you, like, why have you never been to Africa? Marvin X, why have you never been to Africa?
Yeah.
Okay, yeah, you want me to answer that?
Wait, one at a time. Okay, Andre, you go, and then we'll have him go.
All right.
Okay. Well, that's an interesting question. I mean, I've had actually several invitations scholarly to go over, and for me, honestly, I would say there's two reasons. One is just I think, and this is typical of a lot of African Americans, is just attachment to our own culture. So, Muhammad, you know, for those that don't know, we went to high school together and whatnot. And so, as far as I'm a West Philly kid, I love hip hop. I love cheesesteaks and water rice. I love going out to the plateau, the place where the plateau is very. So on the one hand, as much as I understand how America treats us, there's always still sort of an Afro surrealism from where we are with our families, with our associations that keep us attached. Then on the other hand, as far as going to, I got to be honest. I love the changes. I love the advancements that's going on. I love the technology and the fact that the rest of the world is surpassing the United States as far as technology is concerned. Because if you asked me 20 years ago, the trips to Africa were for safaris. They were to see the slave castles. I want to go when I would, if I'm to leave my family and my friends and my associations in America, in Philadelphia, I would be looking to make those associations. I would be looking to join with culture over there rather than being a tourist, a permanent tourist, so to speak. And so establishing those connections for me is what I would be looking for to facilitate my transfer from one to the next.
Okay. And I'm not even, because I feel like I get a lot of, you know, calls and questions, Erinn, I'm sure you too, about people who are like, I want to move to Africa. I want to do a business in Africa. And I'm like, whoa, whoa, whoa. First step, just come for 10 days. Come for a visit. It's not for everybody. Everybody doesn't need to move, but you should come. You should connect with the land. You should see it for yourself. Don't let BBC or, you know, whoever else determine what your idea is about Africa. So I just think that for some of us, I mean, moving is just too big of a concept. Like you said, Andre, like, you know, we know what we know, whether it's bad, good, or whatever. But I just feel like we need to just come and at least visit. Now, Marvin X, you have a very interesting reason why you haven't been to Africa before. So please, can you enlighten us?
Let me begin with the fact that I left America in 1967 as a resistor to the Vietnam War. And I first went to Toronto, Canada, along with some other brothers from here. And one brother is still there, never came back. But I went there to get out of here. I was ready to leave. As a matter of fact, while I was in Toronto, I hooked up with Muslim brothers that were part of the Muslim Student Association of the U.S. and Canada. And they actually gave me a scholarship to the Sudan, to University. But while I was in Toronto, I formally renounced my U.S. citizenship. Okay. So I'm not a citizen of anywhere. I'm stateless, technically. But further than that, when I finally came back to the U.S. from Toronto Underground, I eventually got arrested and I went to trial for draft evasion in San Francisco. And before my sentencing, I left.
Uh-oh.
Refused to go to jail. And furthermore, the Black Panthers had said not only resist arrest, not only resist the draft, but resist arrest. So after sentencing, I left a second time. This time I went to Mexico City and then to Belize, which was British Honduras at the time. So I left here, and I was eventually captured in Belize and given a free ride back here and thrown into federal prison. So I tried to leave here.
Okay.
I've been trying to leave here. At the present time, I still don't have travel documents.
Okay.
And technically I have not tried to get my citizenship.
Okay, you haven't tried to get, okay, but it's possible. I think it's been like 50-some years. You probably should be eligible, but who knows? I don't know.
I don't know. My Congresswoman Barbara Lee told me to go through the process, and then she'll take it from there.
Okay. All right.
I can say more, but we'll talk.
Yes.
All
yes.
right.
Yes. Even I feel like these are one of the things that sort of hinders the connection between Africans and African Americans. There are a lot of stereotypes, that exist about African Americans, how we feel about Africans, how we feel Africans feel about African Americans. I feel like if you're not friends with Africans in America, like how can you come to the continent with, this is their country, right? So of course we know that ancestrally we're connected, but in modern times, there's a lot of division. There's some bridges that need to be built, some healing that needs to be done with the people before, African Americans could come here. We have to like be friends. We gotta be talking. So just with that concept, what do you guys think about that in terms of just, bridging some of the just knocking down some of those walls that have been built between the two people, and we understand why they're there. So it's not like it just has happened automatically. It's not like we have this antagonistic idea about Africans just because we were born that way. We know that no one has wanted us to be together. So yeah, just kind of want to get some insight on that. Anyone who would like to kind of answer that?
I'd like to say this. As you might know, I wrote a book called How to Recover from the Addiction to White Supremacy. The subtitle is a Pan-African 12-step model for a mental health peer group. So along the lines of what you just said, yes, we need to repair with the white man, and we need to repair with our African brothers. And there's those who say we need reparations from Africa. Because, in any trade, it's two. You got a buyer and a seller. So they both made money. There's Africans that accumulated capital just like the white man did. So there's those who say, in particular, Sun Ra used to say, they got to pay. Africa needs to pay too. Now, at the same time, as I just said, with the Pan-African mental health peer group, the idea is that we're both sick. Africans are sick with colonialism, and neo-colonialism, and we're sick with colonialism and domestic colonialism and neo-colonialism. We're both sick. So we need to heal. We need to have some type of ritual of healing. Otherwise, we're going to continue these sick ideas of each other, as they call it in recovery, thinking about each other. And we know the source of it, colonialism, white supremacy. So it's not going to happen. It's not going to happen until we go through a process, a ritual. This is my thoughts on that.
Okay. All right. Andre, anything you'd like to add on that?
Well, sure. I now on the one hand, it's interesting because I hear I recognize African collectivism, etc. However, I'm somewhat of a maverick. I'm a little bit of an individualist myself. So I am one that's trying to pick off brains one by one by one by one, instead of how we as a entire couple 100 million collective are going to make things happen. And so going back to your question beforehand on why I even stay, one of the benefits that I enjoyed as a law professor for 15 years is I had librarians and I had librarians, research assistants at my fingertips that at my whim can get me any book anywhere in the world at my disposal to study pre-colonial African history before white supremacy. And so with that study over the last 20 years, it's not done nothing but pique my interest even more, increase my resolve. And I'm not sure that would have happened without the knowledge. And so one of the things that I'm doing while I'm still here, I'm very close to finishing a book called Afro-Atlantic Jurisprudence, 6,000 years of extraordinary African commitment to equal protection of law. And I use that not only to inspire myself, but to, as you mentioned, combat the stereotypes, combat that myth of Black inferiority that says that Africans before the white man came, that white folks brought civilization to us. I mean, I even sometimes chafe at the idea that unfortunately in academia in the United States, there was still a convention that you must accept that white folks invented law, invented civilization, invented mathematics, invented race, right? When all of those concepts invented private property. All of those things existed in Africa prior to colonialism. And so the breadth of what our possibilities are, the breadth of how we can fit in, to me, expand our entire mindset changes if we understand more than just we were kings and queens. That if we understand that there were political systems, there were differing political systems, there were over 30 states in Africa prior to the year 1200, right? And so
Andre, you're gonna have to come over here to the continent so you can see all this with your own eyes. You know, research. Andre, you got to get on the plane as soon as these
it's
words
coming.
Up, you got to come over here so you can see it in real.
But Andre, you're going to have to be ready for the modern reality. The modern reality is that in the same way that you had to go back independently and search for that information because it wasn't taught to you, well, you're probably going to be disappointed to know that because of colonialism, that history was not taught to most Africans. So you know more about Africa's history than many Africans do. And presenting that is, when you come, if you come, would be a very delicate sort of negotiation, because you also don't want to come with American exceptionalism and American arrogance as it's perceived here. I'm just being real about the reality in 2020 on the ground. And so that's why it's important for people to come and see, because like everyone else, before I came, I had my imagination and I had my fantasy about what Africa was. And it was quite a jarring process to reconcile my expectation, my knowledge of history with the reality on the ground. And in a certain way, it can be quite heartbreaking. In a certain way, it can be quite frustrating. And you just kind of like, you know what, I'm not wearing a jersey. I'm not on nobody's team. But at the same time, it just depends on how committed you are to the African future. That's really the question that people have to ask themselves when they're contemplating coming here, because the Africa of the past has been disrupted severely, the same way or similar way as it has been disrupted for us African Americans. So, you know, it's almost like we have to build a future, recollecting that and trying to reignite some of those things, but it's going to require some education, and it's going to require like a radical future orientation. I say to a lot of African Americans here, be careful. Don't get stuck in Sankofa. Don't get stuck in Sankofa. You know, because the idea of Sankofa is to pick from the past, not to repeat it. Our ancestors did that. They will not appreciate us going back and living a pre-modern existence. So the unstated part about Sankofa is you go back and pick what's useful for going forward. Exactly. You know, and that's, you know, that's a difficult. I'm an Africana studies scholar. Okay, I spent 13 years of my life studying this. So it was a process, and it was troubling having to let go of some of that. You know what I mean? And you know, we focus a lot on our ancestry, and I had to make a shift over 13 years because people who are oriented to their past are moving in the wrong direction. And so I had to start asking myself, what kind of ancestor do I want to be? What do I want my descendants to look back and admire my generation for? You know, taking inspiration from our ancestors, taking inspiration from our past, but we're not going to be able to compete with the world if we're trying to recreate, you know, traditional African anything, to be honest. Elements of it, absolutely, you know, absolutely. But that's one of the things that I find African Americans, myself included, really wrestle with when you're here on the ground, and it's quite a wrestle.
Well, I totally agree, and while I can't say I understand because I'm not there, it is definitely something that I would anticipate, because even in the United States, as a law professor, what I write is taboo. There are not Afrocentric or Pan-African law professors at American Association of Law Schools. You will not get tenure writing the things that I write. Or even if you get out of law schools, great scholars like Toyin Falala and whatnot, they don't cite Sheikh Anta Diop. They don't cite, you have to cite Levitzion and whatnot. So the constraints are absolutely, I guess in the 21st century, you can almost say stunning, that it's still such a roadblock. So it helps for me to understand that, yes, we are, a lot of Black folks in America think of American racism when we should be thinking about global white supremacy. And so no part of the globe has been exempt to that subordination. So so I absolutely agree. Now, where I would push back a little bit is we don't want to repent. And it's funny, I had this conversation with KRS-One almost 20 years ago. It's really kind of funny. We don't want to go back to the past. However, if we don't fully examine the past, then we don't know about all the tools that are in the box, right? If we want to select which tools are appropriate, but if we don't know that we actually even had this, that, and the third to select from, then that limits our choices. So so as a matter of fact, the book I'm writing for Afro-Atlantic Jurisprudence, I try to make very plain that this is my conception of what I think expanded and expand. If I were on the Supreme Court of Afro-Atlantica, this is what I would do. However, this is only trying to open up a conversation for everyone else to tell me where I'm wrong. Tell me where are the gaps? What can be done better? This is not an opportunity for me to write a Bible, right? That it's the start of that. Academics and scholarship is all about starting a conversation.
Absolutely.
Yeah. All right. Well, I think definitely. I think it's, you know, we have to go back and be in the present all at the same time. We don't have the luxury of doing one or the other. So both are very important. I just want to move on a bit because this is something that I hear so much. It was brought up in this conversation about, what Africans owe. Africans made a lot of money off of the slave trade as well. How I liken it is to the drug industry business in America, right? The 70s through the 90s, whatever, drugs ravaged our community. So many Black people made a lot of money off drugs. We know in our families, drug dealers, we're not mad at them today, right? We don't even really mention it, whatever they did 10 or 15 years ago. But what they were doing decimated our communities and our people. So I always think about it like that. Seems like what slave trade was going on in Africa was very similar to what was happening in like modern day drug business, right? Like there were drug dealers, they didn't care who they were hurting, just like slavers were going into these lands. It was about money. People were like crazy off money. And, I just see a lot of similarities. So when we talk about, what happened 500 years ago on the African side, we should also think about how it looks in modern times. There are things that are happening right now that look very similar to what happened centuries ago. So that's something to keep in mind. And Erinn, I don't know, I'm here on the ground. I don't feel that,
give a donation.
I don't feel like that is something that is like a obstacle for me, like that I need Africans, to pay up. I don't know. I just needed to get out of, always feeling like I'm under attack. So, of course there are things that should be done in terms of reparations and things like that. But for me, like that wasn't a major obstacle. But I know I hear that from a lot of Black Americans. So maybe if you guys might just talk about a little bit about that. Like, what do you think Africa owes us, and is that an obstacle to coming here?
Should I answer that?
Yeah, feel free.
I mean, just from a very pragmatic point of view, I get the argument. I understand it. But, Africa had like the, it kind of double backed on them. They participated in the slave trade, but in many ways, Africa is economically in a worse position than a lot of African Americans. And the impact of colonialism still lingers with them today. So for me, on a personal level, and I think also your definition of reparations is important as well. So if your definition of reparations and your desire for reparations and what would satisfy you for what your ancestors went through is economic, then I can understand economic only. Then I can understand maybe that conversation. From a pragmatic point of view, I can just say very bluntly that it's going nowhere. The debt that Africa has, Africa is struggling to even finance itself. So I feel like it's a moot point. I would like for there to be a conversation about it. For my bigger issue is the non-acknowledgement of it in Africa and sort of sweeping it under the rug, acting like it never happened, acting like it didn't exist. I would rather have like a family reparations of relationship conversation about it. And I think Africa needs to have a conversation with itself about the spiritual ramifications of their participation. I think that a lot of the division in Africa today, if you want to look on a spiritual level, traces back to that sort of participation and what it really meant took place, So, but from an economic point of view, I mean, we're trying to get Africa to be debt free. We're trying to get a Ghana Beyond Aid. And for me, that discussion, I'm willing to just kind of forgive and let go for the sake of building a more promising African and a more prosperous African future together with African American participation, with diaspora inclusion. To me, that would be the ultimate repair if we could come together and build this continent and make it prosperous and take our own reparations by what we build together, by what we do with our own power, and not have to receive from someone else. It's disempowering to wait to receive something from someone else, but it's empowering and restorative to go and get it for yourself, to build it for yourself. So those are my thoughts on that.
Okay, all right. I just pulled that one from some of the comments. People also are asking about, I hear, even just, when we were talking about this conversation leading up to it, people kind of had this idea that coming to Africa is sort of elitist. It's for people with, a lot of money. What about the people who are sort of like left behind? Yeah, I mean, that is a valid observation. However, I do just personally, I think that moving to another place, whether it's from the south to the north, wherever it is, it costs money. Their resources. I mean, you see people taking boats across the Mediterranean to migrate to. People take those risks if they think it's something better. That's the only reason why you migrate, right? Unless there's wars, and then you're trying to get to something better. But I think for most of us, we don't see Africa as a place that's better than where we are. So you won't, make certain sacrifices, financial or otherwise, to get there. So I think a lot of it has to really do with how Africa is seen. And especially for African Americans, nobody wants to be connected. We haven't wanted to be connected to Africa because it seemed like a horrible place. You know what I mean? It's like the place in the world where all the diseases come from. There's tribal wars every day of the week. It's hotter than the hottest place on earth. It just sounds horrible, right? So we never have wanted to be connected to like that horrible place. But I think as the narrative is changing, people will start to feel less, wanting less to be connected. But just, what do you guys think of just about that idea of that, finances will limit who can actually stay or come?
I'm an economics person.
Yeah.
I mean, that is my shtick. That is my thing. I'm very weak on justice. Outside of economic justice, I'm weak, right? I listen to hip hop and all that other stuff or whatever, and we can slam hip hop all types of ways and sides and from prisms. So I focus mainly on economics, and honestly, to me, the economics of the situation looks positive in the long run towards repatriation, because we can talk about how bad things are in Africa, but things in America aren't sweet. And it is not getting sweeter. The reason why I call them the strumpets, but the reason why the 45 and his people are in office talking about make America great again is because they know American exceptionalism has been dwindling for over 35 years. It might be imperceptible to a lot of people, but if you really study the economics, we're printing money. What was it? A shithole country he talked about other people. Mm-hmm. And yet here we are printing $3-4 trillions of dollars out of the blue, right? So America's economy is not sacrosanct. It is not something that is totally untouchable. And so what I would like to happen, I don't know how to make it happen, but what I would like to happen is for us to understand on both sides, on both continents, what is it that we can do? What skills do we have in America? And I don't care if it's basketball, entertainment, teaching, whatever the case may be. What is it that we can do over in Africa that will be appreciated, right? Not just psychologically and economically, right? Yeah. And to me, that type of incentive is what is important. Again, I mentioned Derek Bell a lot when I talk. He has a theory called interest convergence theory, and that's relayed to mostly racism and white supremacy. But the kernel, the essence of it is even more powerful than that, that things move when the interests are converged more so than when the justice, conceptions of justice line up. So what I'm looking for and hoping for, Muhammida, you know that I'm working with folks called the Africa Sports Venture Group. I'm working with another brother who runs Black Kids Swim out of Upper Marlboro, Maryland, who is trying to train swimmers to go over to Goree Island for their annual festival, right? And to build relationships that way. What is it that we do over here that is valuable to the continent over there? And when we can, if we can establish those type of connections, then I think they become natural. They become less pushy. They become ways in which people just gravitate towards it. As Bob Marley said, if you're not doing well, travel wide, but to where? To where your skills or whatever you have some value. And so I think that's the conversation or the dynamics that we need to work on.
Yeah. Okay.
If I can comment on that, you know, in terms of people saying, you know, really it's only people of means who can come here, you know, that's real. I mean, you wouldn't go to France broke. You wouldn't move to France and have no money or have no plan. I like to relate African Americans coming to Africa as sort of like moving into the West before it was developed in the West of the US, right? Yeah. And so if you have a pioneering spirit, if you have an entrepreneurial spirit, that's the first wave that we need, because you're not going to come here for the most part and find a job. You have to come here and create a job. And so nearly every skill set, everything you take for granted in the US will be of value here. So particularly, and you'll probably be surprised to know this, particularly vocational skills. A mechanic, you know, if you think back, you know, maybe a generation before us, how an African-American blue collar family might become wealthier, economically, financially free by having a mechanic's workshop that they own. You know what I mean? Or a business to fix cars. Here, that skill set is kind of, for lack of a better way of putting it, is just kind of like guessing at it, you know? So if you are a skilled laborer and you have like dreams of owning your own business in America, you probably could do it better here, you know?
And so that's what we don't hear.
Yes. And so it does take that kind of mindset, because what you would be doing is adding skills by training local people and then creating jobs for them, you know. And because America, one benefit is that the US has a high consumer standard, right? Americans have high expectations for the things that they pay money for. So it means that people that provide services have a high delivery and work ethic, and I'm not finding the words, but the quality that you would provide would stand out here and be a contribution to the society, be a contribution to industry. What Africa is full of is highly educated people that don't build anything, that don't make anything. So the intellectual class isn't necessarily, I mean, and I wouldn't say that we're not needed. We absolutely are in the universities and things like that. But one place where you can come and contribute, one place where you can come and win is in those more vocational, technical, service-oriented skills, but coming with a business mindset, not an employee mindset. Because even if you get hired, even if you do get hired, you're not going to be happy with the salary scale. It's a different salary scale.
Right. So that goes back to, again, I think it's difficult, even impossible, to figure out, how you can impact without having set foot. I mean, I think, when you just land in any African country, city, there are opportunities that you as an individual, will see. I like juice. I buy juice. The first time I came to Ghana, I couldn't believe that there were no juice companies from Ghana. That was all import. With all the fruit that we have here, they were imported from Spain and South Africa and Italy. I mean, now there are a couple companies, even not local owned, right? So that's something I can't tell you before you get here, but that's something that I'm a juice person, so that stood out to me. So, hey, can Muhammida start a juice business? Probably, but you know what I mean? It's those little simple things. You would not have thought about that sitting at my house in New York, when I'd be like, I want to move to Africa and open a juice manufacturing, but some of those things you just have to come. I mean, you just really have to experience it. And then a lot of the, misconceptions that we have about the land, the people, the culture, the reality will set in, essentially. I think that people have asked a couple of questions.
Question, can I piggyback on what you just said?
Yes.
Just to paint a picture. Sorry for interrupting. Just to paint a picture. There is no Walmart here. Not that I'm advocating for Walmart, but if you just imagine what all Walmart is and how prolific it is around the U.S., there is no African American version of that, or U version of that. There is no U version of McDonald's. There's no, and don't bring. This place is organic, so don't bring the processed foods that are going to give us all diabetes and high blood pressure. But what I'm saying is, like, franchises don't exist here. So you can come, and because all the mangoes are organic, you can come, like Muhammad said, and start something that ends up being the McDonald's of Africa, or the Walmart of Africa, or Target, or whatever you have you. And that's why I say it's like an open frontier. The name of my company is Infinite Potential Africa for a reason. It's almost like there's so many opportunities that you'll drown in them. Really, it almost becomes like you don't know where to start, because there's so much that you just carry with you that would add value to this society.
I have a list at all times, a running list of like 20 companies that I have yet to start on any given day. So like
companies, NGOs, social services. I mean, it's just endless. Follow your heart and just believe, and don't have those limitations on your mind, because it's so open here. It really is possible. It really is possible. So I just wanted to add that.
Yeah. Somebody's asking about the emotional aspects of leaving home. I think, Andre, you mentioned that earlier. Philly is where what you love. Just how can people kind of break that kind of emotional attachment? What do you guys think? I mean, I would just like to say that, Africa is not the moon. Right? There's a flight every single day to America. Like, people sometimes that when they come to Africa, that's it. Like, you can never go back. Like, there's a flight every single day, sometimes twice a day. In 10 hours, you can be right back at home where you're like, so just kind of like, but that's a real thing that really stops people from coming. So, Andre, you look like you want to touch on that.
Absolutely. This is the key. This is what we're doing right here. Right? Yeah. The technology that allows us to be anywhere in the world without being elsewhere in the world is what can support this. Just personally speaking, it is that much more attractive to visit, to stay, if I can still go on Versus TV or the internet and watch Fabulous versus Jadakiss. Right? That I don't have to entirely abandon my culture. And then perhaps, as you said, while I'm there, maybe I find an opportunity to make some connection or bring hip hop to wherever I'm there. I mean, having those, being able to, I see this as a tax lawyer. White people leave you. One of the reasons why they won't raise taxes in the United States is because white people will leave. right? What they want wealthy people to stay. And because of technology, there's a race to the bottom in taxation, because I don't have to live in your country and still live in your country. I don't have to live in your country and still operate in your country because of technology, right? And so that same principle is something that can also benefit us, that being in Angola, being in Kenya, being in Ghana does not mean I have to abandon West Philadelphia because of the technology that we're using right here today.
Right.
Yeah. And I will say that the advances in technology and access to internet has really transformed my being here over the past 13 years, because it was very difficult. My family is in the Midwest and the West Coast. So the time difference alone made it very difficult. But then also before WhatsApp is my connection. Like, I can call my sister right now, all the time, have nothing to talk about, and I'm on the phone with her. So WhatsApp has been an amazing tool to keep you connected. But I also recognized that always having a plane ticket home did something for me emotionally. I found that I could fall into depression if I was here for a period approaching a year, and didn't know exactly when my next time of going home was. So in terms of that, because I didn't like that feeling that I was stuck. I didn't come here to renounce my American citizenship or turn my back on my family or anything like that. I was just living in a bigger world. And I thought that I was entitled to America, and I'm entitled to Africa. And if I want to go to Asia, I'm entitled to that. And, sort of preventing yourself from feeling like you're stuck here by always having enough money in the bank to buy your ticket, or even, it's cheaper to get a round trip ticket from America. So it's good, once you get here, if you move here, don't originate your flight in Ghana and then do a return back to Ghana. It's a lot more expensive. So if your flight originates in the US, it's a lot more manageable. And then you always know when your return is. And so you don't feel like you're missing anything, So that's one tip that I would give.
Okay. I think that, I'm reading through some questions. So there's always a lot of questions that I even get personally about starting a business in Ghana or in Africa. Where do I go? I think what you said really about it being like the American West, when the pioneers loaded up their wagons and headed west, there was no rules. There was no rule book. There was no website. There was no one who had done it before, right? So that's what we're talking about, and that's what it's like. So the kind of people who will win here and do very, very well is if you kind of have that pioneering mindset. I just really want to, remind people of that. And then I think there are new consultants. Erinn, you maybe you can say the website, your company. People want to know how, they need somebody to hold their hand and walk them through it, because maybe they want to come, but they're not that kind of pioneer. And that's real. Not everybody is that kind of person, but the people who will come at the beginning will. But there's a lot of hand holding, that needs to be had.
And even if you are a pioneer, don't be a lone ranger. Don't do anything without consulting with somebody on the ground, because you will likely get hustled. Hustling is in our makeup. So don't think that because you're in the motherland that somebody's not going to take advantage of you, because you will be mistaken. Not to say that it's guaranteed, but so
more than likely.
Like I said, come here, visit, get a lay of the land, build relationships with people who can be like, advisors to you, intermediaries, and all of that. Know that land is very contentious. Land is very contentious. So don't buy any land on your first trip. I repeat, do not buy any land on your first trip. because you'll buy it again if you really want it. So, yes, so it is like the Wild Wild West in some ways. It's getting a lot more streamlined. You can go to some of the government websites for some of that information, like the Ministry of Tourism, the Ministry of Foreign Affairs, the Ministry of the Interior. There's even a Diaspora Affairs office in the Office of the President. So do your research and definitely build relationships with people on the ground to, advise on, especially any contractual or financial decisions that you make. You just want to check.
So, I mean, we know that not everyone is going to be able to, come to Africa. So just taking it back to the U.S. and just thinking about what is the solution? Like, what can we do in our communities to, just kind of help us have better lives? Even if we decide to come for a trip to Africa and then we go back home, like what needs to be done? I mean, I think it's interesting that Erinn is from Tulsa, Oklahoma, right? The home of Black Wall Street. So we've seen what happens when we kind of create our own spaces in America on the soil and we say, okay, fine, we're going to do our own thing. And like it's destroyed, right? So just, seeing as, looking back in the past, how can we stay in America and maybe, not go through some of those things that have happened before when we try to sort of, unify and, collectively set up our communities?
Well, for one thing, we can't be scared. We got to get rid of fear and you defend your territory. That's all you can do. Social security. Call it social security. So whatever it takes to back these people up from their aggressions, it has to happen. It's liberty or death. Whatever it takes, any means necessary. So we can survive and thrive. It has to happen. We got to be able to protect ourselves. We know we can't call the police. That's obvious. So who you going to call? You got to call yourself. So we got to protect ourselves. That's it.
I would love to recommend a book by Jessica Nemhard Gordon or Jessica Gordon Nemhard called Collective Courage, a history of African-American collective economic thought. And it's about mutual life companies. It's about mutual benefit societies, all Black towns, the history of cooperative economics here in the United States, because it has just as many tribulations that we can describe from Tulsa and the Elaine massacre in Arkansas and all that. But then we also have to remember that America tells us about our horror stories, but doesn't tell us a lot about our success stories. So we need to balance that out when we talk about that collective economic vision, right? So that trust, I mean, when we talk about trust between African Americans and Africans, I mean, there's not much trust between African Americans. So for me, this whole project fits together. Again, if we're talking about global white supremacy, we're talking about a global myth of Black inferiority that needs to be corrected. And so again, going back to my work, and I know I'm pushing my book and
as you should, feel free to.
But the point of it is to show folks on both sides of the continent how much you've done, that white supremacy is a relatively new thing in this world. It will be a relatively short reign for in relationship to all the other people that have run this world over the last 6,000 years. And there's nothing that's been done that we haven't done. And that hopefully can inspire, at least, if not trust, a better psychology, a better higher aspirations that can lead to commerce on both sides of the Atlantic, greater commitment and commercialization and entrepreneurship here as African Americans that we can either do here or do over in Africa. For me, or Belize, or Brazil, or for helping the Dalits in India, or the West Papuans, right? If we understand that Africanness or Blackness is a global construct, then there's so many more opportunities that we can take to better not just ourselves but our people, and even more than both of those things, my idea is for my kids, right? My kids and then their kids. So in a selfish way, whatever I'm doing, whether it's here or there, yes, I'm trying to help America, I'm trying to help Africa, but I'm really just trying to attack that myth of Black inferiority so that my children and their children have just a little bit easier road to travel when it's their time.
Yeah.
I want to clarify something about white supremacy.
Okay.
And what I want to say is white supremacy is no longer white. It's global supremacy. You know it in Africa. The Chinese are there. Is that white supremacy? What do you call that?
I say
Here in Oakland, the Chinese have bought much of the property. Much of the property is owned. It's not owned by the white man. This property is owned by Asians. Some probably owned by Latins and Africans as well. So we got to be careful about white supremacy, because white supremacy ain't always white.
I'm so glad you said that. I absolutely 100% agree. It's funny I have to toe the balance, because I talk about racism as white supremacy, but I also believe white supremacy was at its height in 1901 and has been slowly on the decline ever since. And what replaces white supremacy is not just automatic fairness and justice. It just means you're going to be in a more competitive world as we were before white supremacy. So we're not looking for utopia or heaven. We're looking for a fair shot, right? A world in which we can apply our talents and hopefully get some success based on our merit. So whether it's versus white folks, or whether it's in competition with China or India or Arabia or what have you, yes, we have to and better educate ourselves, start and patronize Black businesses and institutions, and also stop unduly criticizing each other and promoting that myth of Black inferiority amongst ourselves, because we're going to have to compete with human, social, political, and financial capital against everybody in the world.
I think something that's interesting about that is that, collectively we have the resources. In the U.S., if we look at the Black dollar, it's we're up there with some of the top nations in the world. And then
one of the 16th richest nation. 16th richest nation, Black America.
So we have the
richest nation in the world.
We have the resources on that side, and then on the African side, we have the land and the resources. So when you look at putting those two together, that's real power. And I think that's something that we have to begin to see. The land and the resources the Africans have, and then the financial might that we as African Americans have, and look at putting those together. That is power. That is real power. And I think that's something that, that's why they don't want us to see us as connected, because together, is very powerful. So I think that's something that we need to begin to look at.
So one of the, you initially asked the question, what can we do in the U.S. For those that don't want to come? So I want to answer, there was a lot of things that came up in that, but, one of the, and I want to put this phrase out here of African privilege, okay? Because we're so accustomed to attaching supremacy and privilege to whiteness, and that does psychological damage to ourselves every time we say it. And when we peg our success with them at the center, right? And I understand how in America that, that's really real. But one of the benefits of being in Africa is that you have the privilege to not have to look at things in those terms, because it really is about economic empowerment. And so from a distance, I think this conversation, I don't think any of us are disagreeing. I think we're all adding layers to a conversation. I think it's beautiful. So anything that I say is not in disagreement with what has been said, but because I'm here, I have a unique perspective. So I'm just offering what I feel hasn't been said. I agree with much of that has been, but from a distance, I'm observing the U.S. And one thing I'm observing, you when you're in a situation, it's kind of hard to see a bird's eye view of it. But one thing I would say to my family and friends in the U.S. is don't settle for these symbolic gestures, because we're talking about institutional racism. I don't care about a statue. A statue does not decrease the number of us in prison. A statue does not shrink the wealth gap. Removing a statue does not shrink the education gap. So I would talk because if we don't leverage sort of like the openness right now to make some adjustments, and if we don't leverage it well, what's going to happen is the powers that be are going to get fatigued. And they're going to be like, well, we took down all the statues and we changed the names of all the schools, but that does not touch systemic racism. It actually further entrenches it because you have no symbols to point to say that it exists. So leave the statues up. I will go to a KKK museum if Black children in America have equal access to education, if the wealth gap is decreased. You see what I'm saying? So that's what I would say, looking at it on the outside, and I'm getting nervous because I feel like we're playing ourselves cheap, and all of these, symbolic, touchy-feely kind of gestures, which really don't do anything, do not change any structures of power. Just because Robert E. Lee is not visible in Virginia does not mean that systemic racism does not exist in the police system. Also, defunding the police. I also, I agree with funding schools, and I agree with some of the ways that those resources are being shifted. But I would just say, let's go for the roots, and then the branches will die of starvation. But let's not go for the branches and think that the roots are going to be disturbed, because they won't be. So that's my, if I was on the ground, that's what I think.
I think it's interesting that one thing that being in Africa, we're in Ghana, what it gives you a moment to do is breathe, right? I mean, you can't fully fight your enemies, when you're fatigued. And we're hundreds and hundreds of years of fatigue. It's never let up, not one day. So what happens is, when you come here, you have a moment. You're not under constant, racial attack. There are other issues, and I never make, Ghana or any place in Africa seem like a utopia, but there are things you can breathe. For once, you just don't have to, use your brain space to deal with like racial injustice and, that kind of attack. So I feel like that's something that I always like to say, even if people come for a holiday, those are 10 days.
Rest.
That can take you for probably another 2 years in the U.S. You just need that moment. You just need to be able to breathe, and it restores you so that you can go back and fight some of those fights that we're up against every day.
Yeah.
Well, I don't know if you all discussed while I was off the air about how many Black people do you think will return to Africa? And what are the ones going to do here who don't return to Africa? What are we supposed to do?
Well, that's what I wanted to say. I mean, that's why I had the question about what can we do there, because everybody's not going to be able to come, and not everybody doesn't want to come, and that's real, and there's no judgment. And a lot of us should not come too. So
yeah, like Marcus Garvey said, some of us is bad over here, and so we don't need bad people coming from here over there.
Right. But so yeah, I mean, I think that's one thing. We just wanted to have this discussion to look at, some of the solutions on both sides, because I think there are a lot of issues that have to be dealt with for Black Americans who do want to take the leap and move, just, from the immigration status, from legal status, there's all these things, it's not pretty, it's not easy.
What about the brain drain? Do you think if all of our highly intelligent, highly successful Black people leave here, doesn't that mean there's a brain drain going on here?
Well, that's what's happened in Africa. All the doctors leave. There's been a brain drain here. So, I mean, and I don't think all the Black, professionals or intellectuals or whatever would be leaving. But I think there's, even if a few more came, we need more skilled people here. Just like even in America, we import technical people. We import technical people from India, from Ukraine, and things like that. And then they haven't, taken over our country or whatever. So I think there's just opportunities. I don't think it's gonna shift so far to one side, and not in our time, anyway. Yeah.
I think the problem has to do with planning our future.
Yeah.
For the next 50 to 100 or 200 years.
Yeah.
We mentioned the wealth gap.
Mm-hmm.
The last time I heard, it would take 240 years for us to reach equity with the wealth that white people have right now. 240 years?
It's 240 years if America doesn't fall on its own. It's 240 years if the dollar doesn't fall on its own.
Right.
Unfortunately, we have a sense of white infallibility that's promoted here in the United States, that America is on top and it's always going to be on top, that the economic system is rich and powerful now and that it always will be so, when that is not necessarily the case. Now, I'm not saying that it's going to fall, Babylon going to fall in the next 5 years, 10 years, 15, 30, but we know every system has risen and it has fallen.
Right.
So, I would say one of the interesting things about being in the United States right now is we're trying to prove Gil Scott-Heron wrong. He said the revolution will not be televised, and we keep thinking that it will, when it won't. We keep thinking that if we watch Facebook or YouTube or whatnot, that we're witnessing the revolution. And we're witnessing, just as Erinn had said, Confederate statues and all that. That's to convince the middle white voter that things are fine in America, so that in November they can vote for Republicans or whoever they want to go. Again, the illusion of inclusion in the United States is deep. So we have to basically look beyond the illusion of inclusion. We have to look beyond what's presented to us in media and to something way more fundamental. And so as a teacher, as a professor, for me, it is not a program that we need to institute. It's a framework, a mental framework, a strategy. And number one, that is, as far as Black people, to see us as a global people. And then two, to concentrate instead of Americans, we're encouraged to be prurient. We're encouraged to be wasteful. We're encouraged. But instead, that if we look globally speaking, human capital, social capital, political capital, financial capital, if we're not concentrating on these things while we're looking up from the faces while we're looking up from the bottom of the well, then we're not going to get to the top of it, right? And if we were to concentrate or try to instill that framework in our kids and our people, then we can better trust that they're going to make individual decisions that are better throughout time. It took quadrillions of microaggressions to get us to subordinate us. It's going to take quadrillions of micro corrections to fix it. And so I don't think that any one of us is going to come up with a program of what African Americans need to do, what Africans need to do. I think we need to basically lift as we climb all Black people wherever we find them, so that each of us, generation to generation, will make better, more efficient, more productive.
Take the people with you. Go ahead.
Mm-hmm.
I didn't ask you.
So, Erinn, you part of your work. You said mindset change. Andre touched a bit about that. And just some of the work that he does. Talk to me about that and how you think that can kind of like bridge some gaps and do some healing. What exactly do you mean when you say mindset change, Coach?
Yeah. Was it Steve Biko who said the most potent weapon in the hands of the oppressor is the mind of the oppressed? And so I've been thinking about that since I read it probably 20 years ago. And, reclaiming your mind, reclaiming like who defines you. Like I mentioned before, not defining ourselves in relation to white people, or even using that phrase white supremacy, because it does damage to my mindset. It does damage to my psychology, putting those words together in the same way that I feel that infinite potential Africa, every time you say that, it empowers your mindset. It sends a subliminal message. So it's about whose story we tell ourselves. It's about, where we get our sense of identity, So working on that, reading things like Frantz Fanon, right? Thinking about decolonizing your mind, the way that things are framed all the time perpetuates this hierarchy that keeps us at the bottom. But if you shatter that hierarchy in your thinking, then it gives you a freedom. And really, freedom starts in the mind. Enslavement started in the mind, So I don't know if I fully answered the question, but and coming here where everyone you see, whether it's the homeless person on the street or the president in Flagstaff House, looks like you. Even that subconsciously works on your mindset and allows you to free yourself from this idea that you can only be this, that, or the other, or a very narrow set of options. Sorry, there's a fly bothering me. So yeah, I'll stop there. But
well, I want to say something.
Yeah, because I want you to, because we're talking about mindset change right now, and I want you to tap into some of your 12 steps. So like that's the first step we see now, the mindset change.
Well, the whole point of the book, as I said earlier, How to Recover from White Supremacy. And Dr. Nathan Hare wrote the foreword, and he broke it down to white supremacy type 1, which is white people's problem. White supremacy type 2, that's our problem. And it's Pan-African. It's a Pan-African problem. And it is mental. Like Fidel Castro says, the weapon of today is not guns, but consciousness, or your mental state. And this is the only way, when we talk about healing, what are you going to heal? Aside from your body, you got to heal your mind. And if you heal your mind, what they say, your ass will follow. So it's a mental thing. We got to get our minds together. And that can only happen by what? If we're sick and there's no doctors, or not enough doctors who are trained in holistic healing, then we got to heal ourselves. This is the point why I came up with using that AA model of the 12 step, and I revised those 12 steps for recovery from white supremacy type 2. But this whole thing, aside from the economic thing, is a mental thing. So we got to deal with the mind. That's the only way we're going to get out of here, is regaining our, as Dr. Hare says, our mental equilibrium.
And I would agree with that. Again, for me, besides economics, I'm again a fan of history. To know what it's easier to know what you're capable of if you know what you've already done. And for us as a people to not have on every bookshelf in the world Sheikh Anta Diop's whole collection, starting from the African origins of civilization, myth or reality, to pre-colonial Black Africa, to Africa, a federated state, to not have white authors like Martin Bernal's Black Athena, when I've dealt with, I do career days. I do lots of talks for high school kids in America, or even younger. And one of the things you'll hear is, well, black people aren't good at math, or rules aren't for black people. And I have to respond, black people invented math. Black people invented law. And the moment you say that, the moment, I don't care if the child accepts it or regurgitates it, their face changes. Their eyes change. Their attitude changes. When you just say that one fact, that law started with statehood, nationhood started in Africa, mathematics, engineering, letters of credit, private property, etc. Those, to know what you're capable of, you have to know what you've already done. And so for me, it's very easy to see kids fall into despair, fall into hopelessness when they believe that their entire history started with slavery and is just misery until poverty.
Well, even with that, one way that we can sort of transform the mindset, when you teach slavery, teach resilience. You are the most resilient people on the planet because you survived it, and so, but we have to tell the story, and we have to highlight what is empowering from it. And I absolutely agree that we have to know our history. We also have to take responsibility and make sure that we don't use the notion of systemic racism or so-called white supremacy to justify to ourselves Black mediocrity. We have work to do within ourselves to fight against accepting from ourselves, giving up or being complacent or not rising to our best. But we have to keep telling ourselves that we have infinite potential. We have to keep telling ourselves that. And there are certain things, that we have to silence in order to exercise from ourselves. There's certain phrases we have to stop saying, just like we don't say slaves, right? That was a movement in Black studies to not say slaves. God didn't create slaves. He created human beings. We were enslaved. Just the fact that you were enslaved doesn't make you a slave. So even just that sort of switch. I fight a lot here in the schools when my children are learning about colonial history, and oh goodness, God help the teacher that uses the phrase "our colonial masters," because she's about to get it or he's about to get it from me. Like, we don't call anybody our masters, So I mean, just those little sort of tweaks to
what you're talking about is what I call the psycholinguistic crisis.
Absolutely. Okay.
The psycholinguistic crisis of the North American African. And even with my book, How to Recover from White Supremacy, when I first put that name out, people wrote me and said, don't call it white supremacy, call it white lunacy. But we're dealing with lunatics. These people are crazy. They just fucking crazy.
Yeah.
And I go along with what you just said also about slavery, that the slave. There's a brother here in the Bay Area, brother Ed Howard, who says we should say Africans caught in the American slave system. Africans caught in the American slave system, instead of that focusing on us as slaves. And furthermore, there's a documentary, I don't know if y'all seen it, on the History Channel. It's called Slave Catchers and Resistors. And if you haven't seen that, I suggest you see it so that you can see we resisted every day that we were in the American slave system. Every day. Every day. And all you want to show us is some Negroes picking cotton and sugar cane. So we need to focus on resistance. Resistance.
Okay. All right. Yeah, we're gonna get ready shortly to close it out, but it looks like there are a few more questions about, actually moving to to Africa, the Blaxit, you know, people want to know, what does that look like? You know, I think it's just so hard for people to imagine because we haven't had a lot of images about what modern Africa looks like. You know, I find that it's hard for people in Africa and here in Ghana to believe that. They were like, but they should know we're not all living in trees. They have the internet. And I always push back and say, what would they be Googling? I mean, they just watched CNN and they saw the last war or famine or something. And why would people go and Google, I bet there are rich people in Africa, right? Like, no, they don't do that. So I think it's, you know, kind of hard for people to imagine themselves leaving when they don't have an image or an idea of what it looks like that they're going to.
Yeah, I'm selling those.
Okay, how much?
Okay, you know, put that on pause. Looks like brothers is getting their resources while we on this call.
Oh goodness, Uncle Marvin.
Yeah. But I mean, I think that's right. But you know, I had an interesting conversation on Africa Day, May 25th.
Yeah.
I was on a panel sponsored by the brothers and the sisters over at ASVG Group, and I was moderating a panel with the Minister of Sports and Youth for Liberia, Nigeria, and South Sudan. And I really was very interested in the comments of the brother from South Sudan, Minister Albino Jock. And it's the newest country in the world, if not in Africa, right? But at the same time, it's the oldest country in the world, right? It is Kush, it is Ethiopia, it is it is Nubia, right? It is the place where Egypt got its learned statehood and practice. And when I'm talking to this brother, he's talking about the 64 tribes that united against the Arabs that have now won but are back to fighting each other, and their national unity is fraying because of it. And the fact that we need not just, again, Black people in America or between Americans and African Americans and Africans, but even, again, within that South Sudan, this belief in Blackness and Africans and understanding the greatness from which you came such that you can reach those heights again. I just think it's ubiquitous when we talk about this need for a mentality. I don't want to say change, because I don't think we're going to take one brain out and put a new one in, but at least advance, right? This adjustment that we need to make. I mean, it's ubiquitous. And for me, as much as, again, a Francis Fanon, as much as a Francis Cress Welsing, as much as an Ibram Kendi, as much as those folks are helping us with our mentality, for me, just the facts. We are denied just the facts that we could interpret ourselves about the things in which have been done from North, South, East, and West Africa that preceded European emergence no more than 400 or 500 years ago.
Okay. All right. So yeah. So thank you for that. Well,
let me just add to that. Okay. We have cell phones these days. And all the information of the whole damn world is on your cell phone. So it's almost no excuse for ignorance these days.
Yeah. Well, if I can just plug a little bit, be on the lookout for Infinite Potential Africa doing a web series called Breaching the Gap. And the reason why we use the word breaching is because it's a lot more active than bridging the gap. But we have to, with intention, disregard the boundaries and the borders and the separations that exist between each other. And we have to go and seek to learn about each other. We have to go and seek to gain understanding, to build relationship, and to have conversation. So breaching the gap is something that I've been doing and will continue to do, having conversations right now, having conversations with Ghanaians to discuss misconceptions about African Americans, to discuss, some of the American misconceptions about Ghanaians or Africans at large. But we have to take agency and claim our future, claim the reality that we want, because if we sit and wait to be given our history or to be given reparations or to be given, anything, we're going to be waiting for a long time. So we have to develop a collective spirit of going and getting it. Go and learn your history. Don't wait for someone to give it to you. Go and seek it out. It's there. Go and learn about other cultures in Africa. And if the desire is strong, you'll go and find it, and that really should be the determinant, coming back to the question of should African Americans leave the US. You really have to search your intentions and if Africa is calling you, and how much grit you have and how committed you are to it. Because there's actually nothing wrong with staying in America and taking an intellectual and ideological trip back to Africa. There's nothing wrong with that. And I don't think that we should, all of us shouldn't come here. We have claim in the US, and many of us should stay there for the sake of the Pan-African family to reap the benefits of the foundation that we've laid there. So, but we have to go and seek what we want. We have to go and build what we want. We have to go and take what we want. I'm not a proponent of violence or, warfare or anything like that. In the US, we're frankly outnumbered. So, but we do have to have a defensive posture, and we do have to have an ownership mentality to go and get what it is that we want and what we need and what we deserve.
Okay. I think as we kind of close out a bit, I'll give everyone just a chance to say some last words, but I want to just kind of go talk, Erinn, a bit about, how do people need to prepare for their trip? I'm not even talking about move. We're not going to get to move. How can people prepare for their trip? Because I think that, there are just a lot of misconceptions. One thing that I'll say, as African Americans, sometimes we're like children who have been adopted, right? The adopted children, they fantasize about the mother that gave them away, they just keep dreaming about it. And then they meet her and she's like messed up, right? And it's not the reunion that you dreamed of, right?
Yeah, you're messed up too. You're both messed up because you've been separated.
Yes. So I find that sometimes, African Americans land in Ghana or any other African country, and they're like waiting for the drums to be beating and dancers to come up, and like everybody they come into contact with to have open arms and like my long lost brother. And it's like most modern day Africans don't even know about history. They don't even know how we got to America. Like, you know what I mean? So they don't even know about the connection, and I can't be mad at them, right? Because it's for the healing is for us, right? So I just think that that's something important of just kind of like getting that mindset right before you even come.
Right. So a few keys to the mindset to have is come with more questions than answers. Africa is not going to perform Africa for you. And if you expect her to, you're going to be heartbroken. You're going to see a lot of weaves. You're going to see skin bleaching cream. So if you think that you're coming back to, kings and queens, that's not it. The other mindset is be willing to unlearn, be willing to let Africa show you parts of your Americanness that perhaps you don't want to take back with you. So be willing to learn and unlearn. I say to a lot of people, come with the intention of healing. When you go to those dungeons, leave some baggage there. Don't take it back with you. Leave it here. Let your ancestors swallow it and destroy it. That's one of the biggest benefits of coming to Africa is to come back and have some layer of reparations and repair to your psyche. Another thing is, don't forget, this is a foreign country. It's going to feel foreign, and and be prepared for that. But be prepared to receive what it has to offer, and fully embrace it. I mean, it's just, and you have to come. You have to come. So I think the greatest mindset really is to sort of suspend your expectations, come and see what it really is, and then you will get the fullness of the experience. But if you need things to feel like Dallas or Atlanta or Brooklyn, you should stay in those places. But if you're willing to see what Accra feels like, and be willing to, and expect some discomforts, expect some really beautiful experiences as well, expect a whole gamut of emotions to be stirred up in you, and expect to see wealth that you've never seen before. I mean, I know people who have wealth that I couldn't have comprehended before coming here. It's just so much. It's a huge continent. It's endless. I mean, you could come here for the rest of your life and not fully get all that it has to offer, but just be open and be willing to let it change you. Be willing to let it transform you, because it'll make you better. It'll be painful. Parts of it will be a difficult process, but in the end, it's absolutely worth it. I've been here for 13 years, and that's all I can say.
I've lived here for the past 6 years, and Andre, you brought up something. You were like, you wanted it to feel a bit like home. And I first came to Ghana in 2003 to do graduate school, and I wasn't feeling it. I was not the Ghana proponent that I am today, right? I just was like, oh, what? I mean, I had been to Africa before, so it wasn't like my first time, but it wasn't there yet. But I came again in 2013, and it was a new world. There were like boutique hotels and, clubs. And I was like, okay, Ghana, okay. And then I was ready, right? Because you kind of need that bridge, you want a bit things that feel familiar, but then I'm also very open to, the difference. And I think, now that's why you see a lot more people. I mean, I think Marvin S asked, how many people are coming? I don't know, but a lot are coming, right? I mean, the year of return that, the Ghanaian government, put in place was just massive. I mean, it was massive because, there hasn't been any other African government to even sort of say that you're connected to us, right? So, I mean, was it perfect? I mean, like, what is? But I think, like, psychologically, it did something. The year of the return back to where I came, right? So just those words you guys talked about, linguistics and the power of words. And I just felt like that was so powerful. Year of return, now we're in the beyond the return. So what it did was ignited people's interest, ignited something in people to say, hey, there is actually a place that is calling for me, Now, is that set up when you get here? Okay, maybe not. That's another story, but we're talking about mindset shifts and one step at a time. So I think that there are a lot of people who are going to be coming for that first trip, second trip, and, doing some investment, doing some business. And that's strong because I mean, as we said on this today, like that is where the future lies, is in our coming together and cooperative resources, all of that. And that's what those trips happen. That's what happens on those trips. You start having some bonds with some people on the continent. You spend your resources here that impact people here. Then you go back home and you change the mindset of people that you come into contact with, telling them about the experience that you had. So, it's very powerful. And, Blaxit is, I think, something that, it has touched upon, and over the past 100 years, there's been these movements to Sierra Leone and Liberia and different things. But I think now it's at a different, it's going to happen in a very different way.
I want to flip it. Can I ask you a question, Muhammida, real quick?
Yeah. Yes.
As our resident documentary filmmaker and media impresario.
Yes.
Impresaria.
Yes.
How do you feel about the I recently have watched and gotten some good reviews from people that have watched new South African series like Queen Sono, Agent, on Netflix and whatnot. How do you feel about those shows and the emergence of African media and its worldwide distribution? Do you think that's a trend or a fad?
I'm going to say it is probably going to be the one thing that has the most impact. I mean, I think just throughout my career, I deal a lot with pop culture and, the selling of brands through pop culture. And right now, it's the selling of Africa. It's selling of the changing of a mindset. And I think it's powerful because what happened is, as I said before, we didn't have anything to see when we talked about Africa, right? We didn't know what it was, just like a word, a black hole. But now through media, we're beginning to see what it looks like, what it feels like. We see the videos, we see the movies, or on Netflix now you can watch, the Nollywood films. You can see what's happening. So I think it's going to be very, very powerful in changing the mindset of how we as African Americans connect with the continent. So I feel like, media and propaganda is, what changes minds. That's what nations do. And I think that is something that's going to start happening, with the media, with these shows, with Netflix and these different platforms and YouTube. It's, people are like, oh, okay, Africa's not that bad. I didn't know, So I think, I feel like it's going to be positive.
I mean, even for someone like myself, again, I have to say it had a positive effect on me, even though, again, I'm very critical of media and all that. But as someone who's a social person and like I said, those connections, the idea that, okay, they showed me a restaurant and a chill spot where I think I could pull up on a Saturday and then also down on my, and in 10 minutes, also be in tune to Jazzy Jeff's house party on Saturdays, right? And to get the best of both worlds. That is what, and best of both worlds, and then to be absent from the racism and the microaggressions.
Yes.
That is the fantasy. That is what I think a lot of us aspire to if we can see it as a reality.
Right. So I think that's what happened. Like I said, I came in 2013, and that what you just described, that's what I felt. I'm like, this is the lifestyle that I live in New York, but I'm in Africa and there's no racism. And like, what? I gotta go. So, but again, that can't really happen until, you kind of experience it. But the movies and the film are going to give people that window into what it's like. So just kind of closing out, I just want us all to kind of maybe say some final notes. Marvin X, when you speak, pull your phone back a little bit so we can see your face. Yes, there we go. So yes, if you can share just some closing notes on this concept of Blaxit, what's in the future for us as African Americans, where we, U.S.
Well, I think, we've been on a long journey. And it's time to revolutionize our minds about Africa, about who we are as African people. And we can walk and chew gum. We can go to Africa and we can come back and share the knowledge. And it is time for us, like you said, we have certain wealth over here, certain skills over here, and we should connect. There's no reason we can't connect except our own stupid thinking, stinking thinking. So I'm happy that you're there representing us, representing your family and your ancestors. And I'm sure they're happy that you returned through the door of no return.
Mm-hmm.
So I applaud all of you people, young people that got out of here And like you said, I know what it feels like when you get out of America.
Mm-hmm.
Even if you just go across the border to Mexico,
Right.
you feel better.
Right.
You understand? But we just have to spread the word as you're doing now, and let people know there's alternatives.
Mm-hmm.
You don't have to go through this BS 24/7, like you say, Moo.
Mm-hmm.
We can come out of this, and nature has a way of making things happen. So you have to get out of certain situations.
Right.
You may have to even run for your life.
Mm-hmm.
We don't know what's going to happen here between now and the election.
Right.
We don't know what the hell they're going to come down with. So we got to be prepared. Don't the Jews say, be prepared to stay forever, be prepared to leave tomorrow? So I'll end with that. I love y'all.
All right. Good. Great. Andre.
All right. Well, I'm gonna go a little bit of a different tack. We're talking about Blaxit, which is a play off of Brexit, right?
Mm-hmm. Yes.
And one of the points I made earlier about elevating our view and our image of ourselves and our image and our view of Africa is one thing, but we also have to, if we're going to dismiss or do away with the term white supremacy, we have to stop thinking of white folks as infallible. Mm-hmm. And one of the ways we can do that is to take a real hard look at this American economy. We may be looking to Africa in very serious numbers if the economy in America doesn't perform well. There are lots of cities and states that are flat broke. One of the reasons defunding the police is becoming popular is because that saves white folks on their taxes because they don't want to pay any taxes. So as these states, municipalities, and cities, they have overfunded pension programs, they are running broke. And at a certain point, Texas, Florida are not going to want to fit the bill. So as much as we saw Brexit, wait till you see Texas in 5, 10, 15, 20 years, right? So the idea that you're in a place of security and safety economically, right? We know that there's racial injustice, but I can't leave America because that's the wealth of that. That's not always going to be true. And that downfall may happen a little faster than a lot of people expect. So pay attention, not just to justice, pay attention to finance, pay attention to economics, because that will tell you what time of day it is and what time you may, instead of want to get out, need to get out.
Okay, thank you. All right. Erinn.
Okay.
Final words?
Let me see. In terms of Blaxit, I just want to say this. We're witnessing right now the fall of an empire, of an economic empire, and all empires fall. And I will tell you this, that the future is African. It's African. It's the last frontier on the earth of open markets. And I get really excited by the idea of African Americans and diasporans coming back and working with Africa to build the African future as the next global superpower, because it's inevitable. We were the first, and it's migrated around the earth, and it's our turn again. And so for us to connect with who we are as a people, because of our history, because of our resilience, because of our love for justice, because of our innovation, I would love for the mutual reparation of the diaspora in Africa and to build a story of a glorious African future together, once and for all, to repair and to restore all the damage that has been done. And whether it's African Americans or it's other Americans, the world knows, or if it's China, or if it's India, the world knows that Africa is the future. Now, let's not be late in getting on the bus. Okay, let's get in at the ground level and start building the roots to generational wealth. That's the opportunity that Blaxit offers, generational wealth. and changing this story for the ages. And also, I would say that, with a strong Africa, have a political base that can lobby for justice for African Americans. The reason why, when we have an AU that is stronger and more unified, they can say to the United States as a power broker, listen, when our borders reopen, with all due respect, your diplomats are not welcome back on our shores. That will make the United States stand up. Until you give justice to African Americans, then all negotiations that are ongoing, all business deals that are ongoing, are on pause. So we can come and sort of inject this kind of consciousness into Africa and also build the kind of systems that could guarantee our economic, social, and what have you, security all around the world. But our power base is Africa. Our power base is Africa. And so that's what I would say. Come and be part of the movement, be on the ground floor, because this is the next place for an economic explosion. And you want to invest in that. So for your children and your grandchildren and your descendants, so that in generations to come, they will revere you as an ancestor. So that's what I'll say.
Okay. All right. And I think, as she said, let's not be late to the party, right? Because all the fears that we have about Africa, the Chinese are not afraid. The Italians, the English, the French, they're not afraid, so they're here. They are here. When you come, you will be surprised. I just went to Dakar, talking about going to other countries. I went to Dakar, Senegal, and I was just surprised at the number of Europeans, mainly French, that were there. So all the fears that we have, they're not afraid, and we can't be late to the party. So those of you who have interest, I would definitely like to put out there that a great tour company called Black Love Tours puts together annual trips to Ghana. You kind of go to Ghana as people who live here, guided by people who live here. So you don't feel so much like a tourist, but look out for Black Love Tours. There are also many other companies that are bringing people back. So definitely look out for that. This Blaxit Africa actually. I started out as a documentary film that I'm making. So hopefully I'll get to finish that, because as I said, living in Ghana, I have 5 million business ideas happening at any one time. So the documentary is on that list. So I'm looking to finish that up this year, and just, highlighting some of our experiences to share those with, people all over the world. So definitely, you can follow us at Blaxit Africa, and I'll just be highlighting the websites of everyone here who spoke today and their various projects. Marvin X talked about his book, 12 Steps to Recover from White Supremacy. I think that's something we need to look out for. Andre's upcoming book and his other books at Afrolantica, the work that Erinn's doing at Infinite Potential Africa. Definitely check out my work at Wax Print Media. And, we just have to start understanding each other better, doing these kinds of conversations to, break down, the mental barriers, which as we discussed today, that is really our greatest enemy. So I want to thank everyone who joined us today. Thank you all so much for this conversation. Thank you, everyone, for listening, for your comments. I think it's going to be recorded on Facebook, so we'll be able to access it afterwards and share, the forum. So thank you. With that, we are going to end it, and let's all stay connected.
Yes. Bye-bye.
Okay.
Thank
bye.
you.
Doctor, yeah, that was, very heavy interview.